It was a Tuesday in late October when I heard it. Not over a phone call this time, but from my son's own phone, left face up on my kitchen counter while he stepped outside to check on the gutters. The screen lit up with a message from my daughter-in-law. I wasn't trying to read it. I was just reaching past it for the dish towel, but the words were right there, bold against the white screen, and once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. She won't fight us on it. She never does. Just keep being nice a little longer. Once we're on those accounts, we won't need to ask anymore. I stood very still. The dish towel in my hand, the smell of the pot roast I'd made for them still warm in the air. My son's boots scraped the back porch steps. I set the towel down, moved to the sink, and turned on the faucet. I let the water run cold over my wrists. When Daniel came back inside, I was smiling. "Gutters look fine," he said, picking up his phone without looking at me. "Good," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." I didn't let myself feel it until they left. Until I heard their car back out of my driveway and the sound of it fade down the road toward town. Then I sat down in the chair by the window, the one with the view of the lake, and I let the quiet tell me the truth I already knew. I have lived in this house for 31 years. I did not inherit it. I did not win it. I built toward it, dollar by dollar, through years I won't get back, through a grief I never fully set down. My husband Thomas died 11 years ago, 2 weeks before Christmas. A stroke no one saw coming in a man who jogged every morning and never missed his checkups. He was 56 years old. I was 52. Daniel was 24 and newly engaged to Renee, who I had met exactly 3 times. After the funeral, after the paperwork, after the long, silent winter that followed, I made a decision. I did not fall apart. I had spent 27 years building a life with Thomas, and I was not going to let grief dismantle what his hands had helped hold together. I went back to work full-time at the school district where I'd worked part-time for years. I picked up a second job on weekends, doing bookkeeping for a family-owned hardware store. I paid off the mortgage on our house in town, sold it at a fair price, and used the difference along with careful savings and what Thomas had left in his retirement account to buy this place. The lake house sat at the end of a gravel road outside of Macon, Georgia, with a wide front porch and old pine floors and a dock that needed replacing the day I signed the papers, and still needed it when I finally got around to fixing it myself 3 summers later. I chose it because Thomas had once pointed to a place like it from a car window on a drive we took years ago and said, "Someday." He never got his someday. I decided to live in it, for both of us. I did not invite Daniel to move in with me. "That's important to say," he asked. He and Renee had been living in Atlanta for 2 years, and the rental market had become impossible, and they needed somewhere to land while they saved enough to buy. "Just a few months, Mom," he said. "We'll stay out of your hair." I told him yes because he was my son. Because Thomas would have wanted me to. Because, if I'm honest, I was tired of eating dinner alone on a porch that seated 6. They arrived in April with a truck full of furniture and Renee's very specific opinions about where everything should go. She was polite about it. Always polite. The kind of polite that comes with a thin edge underneath. Within a week, she had rearranged the kitchen cabinets. Within 2, she had asked if we might replace the curtains in the main room. Hers were nicer, she said, and the light would be better. I nodded and said, "Whatever you think." I told myself I was being flexible. I told myself that was what family did. By summer, Daniel had set up automatic bill pay from his account, which I thought was a kindness until the gas company sent a notice addressed to a Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, and I realized my name had been quietly moved to secondary contact. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he waved it off. "It's just administrative, Mom. Easier to manage from one place." I didn't push back. I told myself not to make a fuss. I had spent so many years being the steady one, the practical one, the one who kept things running without complaint, that I no longer knew how to raise my voice in my own home without feeling like a guest apologizing for speaking. Renee started calling it our house so naturally that I once caught myself using the same phrase and had to stop. The first time I felt the ground shift beneath me in a way I couldn't explain away was a Sunday in August. Renee came downstairs while I was reading on the porch and sat across from me with a cup of coffee and a particular kind of smile I had come to recognize, the one she wore when she had already made a decision and was only now informing me of it. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "about the future." She glanced toward the lake. "Daniel and I feel like we've really put roots down here. And we were wondering, have you ever thought about what your plans are, long term?" I closed my book. "Plans for what?" "For this place." She said it gently, like she was delivering news I should have expected. "I mean, it's a big house for one person to manage eventually. And with everything going up in value, Thomas's investments, the property itself, it might make sense to start thinking about how things are structured." I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm 63, Renee, not 103. She laughed. "Of course. I just mean that Daniel worries about you. We both do. And it would give us such peace of mind to know everything was set up properly in all our names." I said I would think about it. I did not think about it. But after that conversation, I started paying closer attention. I noticed things I had previously explained away. The way Daniel handled calls from my financial advisor twice. I came into the kitchen to find him on the phone with the firm, speaking in the easy, familiar tone of someone who expected to be answered. When I asked him about it, he said he was just keeping himself informed in case something happened to me. The way Renee had asked, twice, whether I had updated my will since Thomas passed. The way they talked about the house's renovation potential, what they could do with the south-facing wall, how the dock could be expanded. Not we, the three of us, we, the two of them. I began to feel like a person slowly being edited out of my own story. The message on Daniel's phone was not a surprise. That's what I had to sit with that evening as the lake turned gray in the early dark. Part of me had been waiting for confirmation. Part of me had been hoping it would never come. Now that it had, the hoping was done. And something else, something quieter and more certain, took its place. I did not tell them what I had seen. I finished the pot roast, put the leftovers in containers labeled with masking tape and a marker the way I always had, and I went to bed at my usual time. I lay in the dark and listened to the water, and I thought about Thomas. And I thought about the 23 years I had worked and saved and carried grief like a second body. And I thought about the word accounts. Once we're on those accounts, we won't need to ask anymore. In the morning, I called my sister Beverly. Beverly is 4 years older than me, sharp as a new pencil, and she has a way of listening without interrupting that I have been grateful for my whole life. I told her everything. The kitchen cabinet rearrangements, the bill pay, Renee's conversation on the porch, the message on the phone. I heard her breathing slow the way it does when she is thinking hard. "You need to talk to Robert," she said finally. Robert Samuels was the attorney who had handled Thomas's estate. Beverly had used him for her own affairs for years. "Not tomorrow. Today." "I don't want to overreact," I said. "You're not overreacting," she said. "You're just slow to react. There's a difference." A pause. "Maggie, once we're on those accounts, we won't need to ask anymore. Those are not the words of people who love you." I called Robert that afternoon, from my car, parked at the end of the gravel road so the sound of the water would settle me. He asked me to come in the following morning and bring everything, the deed, the investment account statements, Thomas's original will, and any documents I had signed since his death. I brought them all. Robert was methodical, unhurried, the kind of man who never let anything show on his face when he was reading a document, which made it all the more notable when he looked up from the investment account statement and said, simply, "When did you add your son to this account?" I stared at him. I didn't. He turned the paper around and showed me. Daniel's name had been added as a secondary account holder 8 months earlier. The signature at the bottom was mine. I had no memory of signing anything, but there it was. I felt the room go very quiet. Not a shocked quiet, more like the quiet of something I had suspected becoming real. I thought about the stack of papers Daniel had handed me one evening last winter, saying the financial firm had sent some routine update forms. Nothing to worry about, just needed my signature in a few places. I had trusted him. I had signed without reading closely. That is the thing about erosion, it doesn't announce itself. Robert and I spent 2 hours in his office. He explained my options clearly and without drama. What had been done was not, on its own, irreversible, but it needed to be addressed immediately, quietly, and in the right order. We drew up a plan, a revocation of Daniel's secondary account access, to be processed directly through the institution, a new will, replacing the previous one, which had left everything to Daniel with few conditions. An updated property deed confirmation, certifying sole ownership, and this was the part that took the longest, a conversation with a wealth management contact. Robert knew personally a woman named Constance, who had handled situations like mine before and would make sure there were no other quiet additions I hadn't noticed. I did not cry during any of this. I had cried enough in the years after Thomas died. Enough to know that tears didn't build anything. What I felt sitting across from Robert was not grief. It was precision. I thanked him on the way out. He held the door and said, "Call me when it's done." I told him I would. What followed over the next 6 weeks looked completely normal from the outside. I made dinner. I watched television with Renee on the nights she was home early. I asked Daniel how work was going and listened to his answers and laughed at the right moments. I brought home flowers for the table on Fridays because I always had. I gave them nothing to notice. Underneath, I was careful. Constance confirmed that no other accounts had been tampered with. The deed was clean. The revocation of Daniel's secondary account access was processed on a Thursday while he was at work and Renee was at her book club. Robert filed the new will on a Friday afternoon. I kept copies of everything in a lockbox at Beverly's house, which is 40 minutes away, in a town Renee had never been to. The new will left a portion to a scholarship fund I established in Thomas's name at the high school where I had worked, another portion to the women's shelter in Macon, where I had volunteered quietly for years. A small trust, carefully structured, for my own care in later life, and a single personal item for Daniel. The watch Thomas wore every day. The one Daniel had asked for twice since the funeral, and which I had kept in my nightstand drawer, waiting until I was sure who I was giving it to. I was now sure. Once everything was signed and filed and secured, I made my next decision. It was not impulsive. I had been thinking about it since the morning I sat in Robert's office and heard myself say I didn't in answer to a question about my own accounts. I did not want to spend another winter here, in a house that had been slowly redecorated to feel like theirs, listening to conversations through walls that had once been mine alone. I called a realtor named Patricia, who had worked with a friend of mine on a sale the previous spring. I told her I needed to list the property. She drove out on a Wednesday morning while Daniel and Renee were both at work, walked the rooms with her tablet, and had comparable listings pulled within the hour. "You'll move fast," she said. "Market loves lakefront. And this porch alone, I just need it to be clean and quiet," I told her. "No open houses. No signs out front until I say." She nodded and did not ask why. I began packing. Not all at once that would have been noticed. A box here, a bag there, carried out during the day and loaded into my car and driven to Beverly's basement, where she stacked them neatly and didn't ask more than I wanted to tell. My things, my photographs, my books, the kitchen items that had belonged to my mother, the quilts I had made, the painting from Thomas's office, the small wooden box he had built in the garage the winter before he died and given to me without occasion, just because he felt like it. I left their things exactly as they were. Patricia brought me an offer within 11 days. A family from Chattanooga, a couple in their late 40s with grown children and a shared dream of a lake property they could eventually retire to. They had seen 3 other listings and moved on all of them. When they saw this one, They offered full ask within 48 hours. I signed the papers at Patricia's office on a Monday morning while Daniel was in Birmingham for a work conference, and Renee was at her yoga class. I did not tell them I was going. The night before closing, I slept in the house one final time. I left every light off and sat on the porch until after midnight, watching the lake in the dark the way Thomas and I used to do when the nights were too warm for sleep. I thought about all the years I had made this place mean something, the repairs I had made alone, the seasons I had watched alone, the meals I had cooked for people who had begun to see me as a resource rather than a person. And I thought about something Beverly had said to me when I called her, weeks earlier, still shaking a little from the conversation in Robert's office. "You have been so busy taking care of everyone else," she said, "that you forgot you were allowed to take care of yourself." I left the next morning before dawn. I took the last box. I left Renee's curtains in the windows because they had been her choice and they could stay with the house. I left the kitchen cabinets rearranged the way she had done them. I left the front doormat she had picked out and the throw pillows she had bought and the little framed print she had hung in the hallway without asking. On the kitchen counter, I left a single envelope with Daniel's name on it. Inside was one page. No explanation. No apology. No invitation to discuss. Just the address of the storage facility in town, where I had put the furniture they had brought from Atlanta, along with a code for the unit, paid through the end of the month. And at the bottom, one sentence. "I finally took your advice and stopped being a burden." I drove away from that house in the pale gray of early morning with the windows down and the radio off and a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I already knew what the road behind me looked like. It was the road ahead I was interested in. I had found a small apartment in Savannah, 2 bedrooms, on the 3rd floor of a building with a courtyard where someone had planted rosemary along the fence line. It smelled like it every time I came through the gate. Beverly helped me move in over a long weekend, and by Sunday evening, I had my books on the shelves and my coffee maker on the counter, and Thomas's painting on the wall above the small writing desk I had always wanted and never had room for. Daniel called that evening. I knew he and Renee had come back and found the house empty because Renee called first, twice, and then Daniel, and then both of them, in rapid succession, for the better part of an hour. I did not answer. I made chamomile tea and sat at the writing desk and listened to the messages accumulate like weather. Daniel's voice in the first message was controlled, careful. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. Call me back." The second was shorter, tighter. "The storage unit, you put our stuff in storage? What is this? Where are you?" The third, the one that told me exactly who he had become, was quieter and harder than the others. The voice of someone who has realized the thing they planned for has slipped out from under them and is now trying to figure out how to retrieve it. "This isn't just your decision to make. This house was part of our future too. You had no right to do this without talking to us. We will get legal advice, and you should know that." I saved that one, not out of bitterness, just because clarity is worth keeping. 3 days later, he sent a text asking to meet. I agreed, not because I owed him an explanation, but because I wanted to look him in the eye one more time and say what I had come to know. We met at a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral ground. Daniel was there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, without Renee, which surprised me. He looked tired. He stood when he saw me, which he had always done, one small habit of good manners that had survived everything else. I sat down. "I did not order anything. You have to understand," he started, "that we had plans, real plans. We were building something there." "I know," I said. He blinked, slightly thrown. "Then why didn't you talk to us? Why didn't you?" "Because I found the message," I said. "On your phone, when you left it on my counter in October." A pause. Something shifted in his face, a tightening around the eyes that told me he knew exactly which message I meant. "That was taken out of context," he said. I didn't argue it. I reached into my bag and took out a small folder and set it on the table between us. He looked at it without touching it. That's a copy of the account statement from our financial firm, I said, with your name on it, added 8 months ago. I signed papers you gave me without telling me what they were. I let that sit for a moment. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? He was quiet for a long time. When he looked up, something in his face had changed again. And for just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner, asking me to check his math, trusting that I would tell him true. I felt the ache of that. I didn't look away from it. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said finally. I know, I said again. And I did. That was the hardest part. Not that he had intended cruelty, but that he had decided somewhere along the way that what was mine was available to him, that my patience was a strategy he could rely on, that my love was a lever Renee could operate, that I would keep being soft ground for as long as they needed to build on. He hadn't set out to take from me. He had just never, not once, considered the alternative. The house is sold, I said. I'm not going to tell you what I kept and what I gave away because it's no longer a conversation we need to have. What I will tell you is that I changed my will. There's a copy of that too, in the folder. You don't need to read it now, but I wanted you to know I did it with a clear head and good advice, and no anger. He looked at the folder. He didn't open it. Daniel, I said. I waited until he met my eyes. I would have given you almost anything if you had asked me the way people ask people they love. Do you understand that? He looked down at the table. He didn't answer. I stood and picked up my bag. Your father's watch is with the furniture in the storage unit, I said. It's in a shoebox on the second shelf, on the left. It's yours. It always was. I walked out into the afternoon. The sun was warm for November, that particular southern warmth that feels like a long exhale, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed it in. I did not feel triumphant. Triumph implies someone losing. What I felt was something more like completion. The quiet satisfaction of a thing finished. A door properly closed. A room made tidy before leaving. Beverly drove down that weekend, and we walked along the riverfront and ate oysters at a place with brown paper on the tables and laughed about something neither of us would later remember, and it was the best evening I had had in years. I got a library card. I joined a water aerobics class at the community center, not because I particularly loved water aerobics, but because it met 3 times a week and the women in it were talkative and warm and said my name like they were glad to hear it. I started a journal, something I had always meant to do and never made time for. I cooked the things I wanted to eat, small, simple meals for one, with good ingredients and no timeline. I stayed up too late reading. I woke without an alarm. I thought about Daniel sometimes, the way you think about a weather system that has passed through. Not with anger, not with longing for what might have been. I had spent too much of my life hoping for a version of events that had already decided not to arrive. What I felt was something simpler, a sorrow for the distance, and a resolution not to let that sorrow outlast me. I did not wait for him to call. If he called, I would answer. If he came to me honestly, with both hands open and nothing hidden, I would meet him, not halfway, because halfway had cost me more than I had left to spend. But as far as the truth would carry me, I thought about Thomas less painfully than I had in years. Not less often. I still heard him in certain silences, still saw him in the way afternoon light fell across the writing desk the same way it had in his office. But the grief had changed shape. It had become something I carried differently. The way you learn to carry a thing when you've been carrying it long enough. Not lighter, exactly, but integrated. Part of the posture, part of the body. I had a photograph of him on the desk, one I had taken on a trip we took to the North Carolina mountains the year before he died. He is standing at the edge of a viewpoint, facing away from the camera, looking out over a valley so wide and green it seemed impossible. He looks like a man who is exactly where he wants to be. Some mornings I sat with my coffee and looked at it for a long time. Not grieving, just remembering. One afternoon in February, I was at the community center for my water aerobics class, When one of the women, her name was Harriet, she had a magnificent laugh and silver hair she wore pinned up with what appeared to be a chopstick, told me she had been thinking about starting a group. Not a grief group, she was careful to say. Not a support group, exactly. Something more like a dinner club for women who had figured some things out and wanted somewhere to say them out loud. What kind of things? I asked. She shrugged. The kind you don't say at Thanksgiving. I told her I was interested. We met for the first time on a Thursday evening in Harriet's apartment, 6 women around a table with a pot of gumbo and a bottle of Riesling, and what started as dinner became something close to a reckoning, each of us, in our own way, arriving at the same question from different directions. How do you know when you've given enough? How do you know when the love has cost you the self? I didn't have the answers, but I had some of the language, and I shared it without rehearsal. I talked about the house and the accounts and what it felt like to sit in an attorney's office and see your own signature on a document you didn't remember signing. I talked about the dish towel in my hand and the water running cold over my wrists and choosing, in that moment, not to feel anything until they left. No one around the table said, "But it's your son," the way I'd been afraid they might. A woman named Dolores said she had done something similar with a rental property and a nephew. A woman named Cora said she had not yet done what she needed to do, and she looked at her hands when she said it, and Harriet reached over and covered them with her own. I walked home along the riverfront that night, slowly, with my coat open to the winter air. The water was very still. The lights from the bridges made long, gold lines across it. I thought of the letter I had written myself the morning after I closed on the sale, the one I sealed in an envelope and put in the lockbox at Beverly's. To open in a year. I had not opened it yet. I thought about what I knew it would say, and whether it was still true. I had written, in part, "You did not give up on him. You gave up on the version of him that no longer existed. That is not the same thing." I still believed that. Maybe more than I had when I wrote it. The winter moved slowly into spring, the way it does in Savannah, not with a fanfare but with a gradual warming. Jasmine coming back on the fences. The courtyard smelling of rosemary and something greener. I planted 2 pots of herbs on my small balcony, basil and thyme, and watered them every morning. They thrived. I took it as a small, uncomplicated sign. I did not receive anything from Daniel until April. A letter, handwritten, no return address, but the postmark was from Raleigh, where he and Renee had moved after leaving the lake house. It was 2 pages, front and back, in his handwriting, which had not changed since he was a teenager. He wrote about things I hadn't expected about Thomas, and about what it had been like to lose him, and how much of that grief he had swallowed because he thought I needed him to be strong. He wrote about Renee in ways that were careful and honest, and told me more than he perhaps meant to about who she had encouraged him to become. He did not ask for anything. He did not explain the accounts away. He wrote, near the end, "I don't know if there's a way back from this. I want to think there is. I understand if you don't." I read it twice at my desk, with the morning light coming through the window. Then I set it down and sat for a long time with my hands in my lap. I did not write back that day, or the next. I let it rest in me the way news rests before you know how you feel about it. What I knew was this. I was not the same woman who had stood in my laundry room with a dish towel in her hand, afraid to make a fuss. I had learned, slowly and at some cost, the difference between loving someone and shrinking for them. I had learned that dignity is not a response to being wronged. It is not earned in the leaving, or in the courtroom, or in the look on someone's face when the key doesn't fit. It is a practice, something you choose over and over in ordinary moments before anything has gone wrong. Thomas had known that. I had forgotten it for a while. I was remembering. I got out the stationery I kept in the writing desk drawer, cream paper, the kind Thomas had always teased me for buying, and I set it in front of me. I didn't know yet what I would say. I wasn't ready to say it, but I picked up the pen. That felt like enough for one morning.